For those of you unaware, Jewish Family Service is a nonprofit, non-sectarian social service agency whose mission is to preserve and strengthen the quality of individual, family, and community life based on Jewish values. It was established in 1980, and this year we're celebrating our 35th year of providing services to a diverse socioeconomic population in the community. Our services include mental health counseling, career counseling, and family mentoring. We run a volunteer visitation program, programs for seniors, emergency food assistance, or TIPA, which is a community chaplaincy program, and programs for special needs children and their families. We also have been meeting the needs of Holocaust survivors, providing home care, supportive counseling, and Cafe Europa, a monthly socialization group designed for the Holocaust survivors in our area. All proceeds from tonight's event, in fact, are going to support our funds for the Holocaust Survivor Program. Tonight, we commemorate the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, the deadliest of the Nazi Germany killing camps. We will be paying homage to its victims and honoring its survivors. The Holocaust was one of the darkest times in the history of humanity. We talk about the Holocaust as we try to understand how so many could have fallen into the abyss of evil. Importantly, we also reflect with reverence the heroic spirit of the victims and the martyrs. However, despite our reflections and discussions, hatred and injustice still run rampant. We read about ISIL, the killings in Paris, the mass murders in Nigeria. However, we don't have to even leave our own borders to find injustices that must be addressed. We cannot simply lament the Holocaust. We must speak out. As Elie Wiesel said, there may be times when we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time when we fail to protest. As we face often bleak news, perhaps it is also worth remembering something Robert Kennedy said. Each time a man stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope. Our program tonight is about hope. Now I would like to introduce Rabbi Evan Jaffe from the Jewish Community Center of Flemington, a longtime friend of Jewish Family Service, and of our speaker tonight, Tova Friedman. Rabbi?
For those who came to Tova's 20th anniversary celebration, the 20th anniversary of her work with JFS, I told this story then, but I want to tell it now, and I want to tell it a second time because it's still very much true. And some of you may have heard this story. It's about the famous violinist Yitzhak Perlman, who many of you know is not able to walk on crutches, and for him to get on and off stage was always a very difficult thing. Well, in any event, in 1995, he was performing at Lincoln Center, and as he got into a few bars of the concerto that he was to play, one of the strings of his violin broke, and it was a loud sound. Everybody knew what had happened. And of course, everybody, this is all going on very quickly, but everybody was thinking, what's Yitzhak Perlman going to do? So difficult for him to get off stage. Is he going to? Well, in any event, he closed his eyes for a moment. He looked at the conductor and said, "Let us continue." And so throughout the concerto, he almost had to recompose and replay the piece without one of the strings of the violin. But evidently, his performance was so inspiring, minus a string, that the entire audience stood up at its end and gave him a standing ovation. And it is said that Yitzhak Perlman said, in response to this, that it's the artist's task to find out how much music he can make with what he has left. And when I think about Tova Friedman, I think of that artist making music with what she has left, emerging from Auschwitz 70 years ago, a child survivor. She has come to this country. She served JFS for 30 years. She's been involved in a documentary. She's in a book, all of these different things. But I can tell you, being a longtime friend and having had the privilege, really, of watching her in front of kids tell her story as a survivor of Auschwitz, that she has affected the lives of more people than any of us here can count. Think of how many years. I got to see at least 4 or 5 presentations at the middle school, JPK Middle School in Flemington. And there was an auditorium year after year filled with kids who, you know, this was the end of the day. I think it was usually about 1:30 or 2 o'clock, wanting to get out. And within about 2 minutes of her beginning her presentation, they sat there year after year, and you could hear a pin drop. And I'm thinking of all of those kids in this age, not only of rising anti-Semitism, but also Holocaust denial, to have had the privilege of having someone who was there, a survivor, tell her story in such a powerful way that I would strongly suggest to you that none of them would ever be part of the Holocaust denier camps. This is what she has done. This is the music that Tova Friedman has made in this way, and of course the hundreds of lives that she has affected as a therapist. So with that, Tova, since I've given you such incredible billing for your thing, I know you will not disappoint. But I have to tell you, I don't mind listening to her for, I think, a 5th or 6th time at least. And it is really my pleasure to introduce her. So Tova.
This works. Can you hear me? Okay. As you will hear, my life had many miracles, but I need one today. I have laryngitis. Can you imagine? I planned this talk for a long time. I woke up in the morning and I could hardly talk. So one of these gentlemen here, I don't know who he is, tall guy. Yeah.
Yes. 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 John.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
So as I was telling people that I can't talk to them, I can't say hello, because I know a lot of people here, he said to me, think as if you're talking, as if God is talking to you. And it's true. I really think, I feel like that. That although I can't talk the way I always have with my strong voice, I'm here. And that's a miracle in itself. I have my daughter here. She wasn't supposed to have been born even. I was supposed to be annihilated. Not only do I have my daughter and my son here, and my son's wonderful wife, but I have my 2 grandchildren who want to say something too. I think they're part of my family. They like to talk. And the way we're going to do it, I took my daughter back to Auschwitz. A television station took us back so I could show her. And you will see the movie. It's only about 4 or 5 minutes of our Auschwitz trip. Then she will talk a little bit, and then I will come back, and then I will start my story. But I want you to appreciate the whole process of taking a very young woman to Auschwitz and to show her some places where people like Mengele, you know, I'm sure most of you know about it, experiments with twins. And she has 2 sets of twins. So it was very poignant for her, and she will relate to this. Came in right in here, was open, and there we are. See this? To me, this booth, this tower, there were the guns, there was guns, all of them. See that? Look at that. Just picture SS pointing straight to this train. And, oh my gosh. And I remember getting out here, and there were hundreds of people, because you know we were in the train for 3 days, and it was dark, and it was so hot inside, and I remember the darkness because there were just bodies everywhere, and arriving here was the first light that I just saw in 3 days. And I remember standing here, and there were just people everywhere, and then the dogs were...
After a torturous 3-day ride in a cattle car without food or water, Tova and her mother arrived at Auschwitz in June 1944. Her father was sent to Dachau.
What do you think you were doing here? I mean, do you have any concept of...
No concept. Although there were crematoriums in that direction. We knew there were crematoriums there, you know? And I don't know whether I knew exactly that crematorium meant annihilation. I mean, we were petrified. I was petrified of the dogs. I wasn't even, you know, they were just here. They were just standing very, very close. They were eye level with me. You know, so, but I knew that there were people, and we were all got undressed here. And we stood naked. And let me show you. There was my mother. There was my mother holding my hand just like that. And she said, and I said, and I looked back because it must have been a little further because all these people were in the back. I looked in this direction and I said, why are all these people undressed? Why were we getting so undressed? And she said, they're looking to make sure that we're healthy. If we're not healthy, she pointed to this direction. She said, if we're not healthy, this is what's going to happen to us. That they were going to something. I knew that something terrible was going to happen to us. So when I got undressed, and you were like this, or you were, not you, I got undressed. I'm mixed up now. It was me, my mother. I'm just going to show you, as if you were, you know, my little girl. And I said to her, Ma, look at me. Am I okay? And I turned around everywhere, and she said, you're okay. Nothing is going to happen to you. And then I believed her. And I said to her, what about you? She said, I'm okay too. And that's how we entered.
Hear me now?
How's this now? Okay. So as my mom mentioned before, my name is Taya, and in a few minutes, my mother's going to tell you about her experiences in the Auschwitz concentration camp. But before she speaks, I just wanted to spend a couple of moments and talk to you about what it's like to grow up in the shadow of the Holocaust as the second generation. And you could ask, after 70 years, how does the Holocaust really affect me? What does it mean? What does it mean to me? So I'm here to tell you that I look like you, I shop like you, I talk like you, but I look at the world through very different eyes. And I know that all the terrible things that happen in the world today will leave children who look like typical children, who may act like typical teenagers, and who work like a typical adult, but they're going to look at the world through very different eyes. Soon you will hear directly from my mother about her experiences, and I hope and I know it is something you will never forget. Because for years, I was haunted by my mother's stories. When I would hear a train pass by, I would think of cattle cars, of people standing for hours, pressed against strangers. No water, no food, barely any air, being transported to concentration camps. And when I look at small children, I would imagine the little kids in Dr. Mengele's experiments, writhing in agony as he measured their threshold for pain. As my mom told you before, I have twins of my own, and we all know he is quite famous for his experiments on twins. As you saw in the documentary, a couple years ago, I had a chance to go back to Poland with my mother and a television crew in order to document her experiences in the Holocaust. To tell you the truth, I didn't want to go. I was afraid to. But then I thought, maybe it's time. Maybe it's time to tell how the second generation is affected. We weren't there. We didn't see the horrors firsthand, but we lost our families, our grandparents, our aunts, our uncles, and the cousins that were never born. And while many survivors carry the burden of guilt because they survived, we also carry guilt because we know that we wouldn't have been born if the Holocaust hadn't happened. And so we need to prove that we bring value to the world, whether it's in our jobs, with our families, or in our communities. One of my most memorable moments during the trip was standing in the middle of the Kinderlager, that's the children's camp, only yards away from Mengele's barracks that would haunt me later. I closed my eyes and I saw the children, bloated bellies, sunken eyes, playing with each other as they waited for certain death. I saw my mother watching the swirls of white ash from the smokestacks, wondering if that is all that remained of her mother. So starving and destitute, she didn't even care. She just waited her turn. Finally, it was her turn. She lined up with the other children. She showed me the path that she took, past the women's barracks, past her own sobbing mother, to the gas chambers that awaited her. I've heard it many times. It takes a new dimension when you're physically there, sitting on the dusty barracks where she slept, walking down the same cold stone steps that she took to the crematorium, and touching the once electrified fence that surrounded the camp. It was no longer a theory. It wasn't a story. That was reality. You're taken back in time. The images are vibrant. Thousands of starving people, the stench of death in the air. There's nothing that you can say, nothing to erase those images, and to think that this person that I am with, who gave me life, experienced only death in her childhood. The wind was cold. We walked silently around the camp. Her stories filled my head. I thought of my children back at home, shining eyes, rosy cheeks, chubby arms. And I cried for the women whose babies were torn from them, watching as they were dismembered limb by limb, or flung like dolls into shallow graves. As a mother, the pain that I had felt was immense. The desire to protect your child from harm is primary. I hurt when my child bumps his head, and yet here were the women who were forced to endure the unthinkable. I thought of my grandmother, needing to protect her daughter, sneaking her pieces of stale bread, and sending her secret messages to give her courage. Auschwitz was not the only place we visited. Images of mothers and children permeated every place we went, especially in her hometown of Tomashov. We stood in the central square, watching the hustle and bustle of everyday life. I was surprised at how large this town was. I had always pictured it as a little village. I saw a woman pulling a small child behind her. I saw a young couple pushing a stroller. And again, I thought of the daily activities that mothers and children performed together, walking hand in hand to school, shopping for food, visiting the dressmaker. But where were my grandparents, my great-uncles, my aunts, my cousins? They should have been walking these streets. I stood there like a stranger, though this town had been home to my family for hundreds of years. At one point, my mother took me to the area where she and her mother sat after the war, waiting for her family to return. As my mother and I sat on the rock, I pictured my grandmother in that same spot, sitting in despair, as hours, weeks, and months passed by, and not one of over 100 family members ever returned. Sitting there wondering, why did she survive? And why had the others not? This should have been a visit to meet my family, but there were new people living in their apartments, new people in the streets, new people in their stores. In a way, I did feel like I was meeting them. I heard their voices echoing in the stillness. I felt their pain as I walked through their path. And I feel that by visiting their hometown, burning their image into my memory, seeing how they once lived, I did honor them. Sometimes, when the kids were small and I bathed them, I would wrap them in a big towel. I hold them close. I smell their sweet, innocent smell. I open the towel and I kiss their bellies, and I plant small kisses, and they giggle and they ask for more. But then I would think about all the other children, same age as mine, whose bellies were once being kissed lovingly by their mothers, laughing with joy as they cuddled. What happened to these children? What happened to their mothers who once held them so lovingly? Over 1 million children killed. My mother is one of the youngest survivors of Auschwitz. So I feel it's my duty to remind people of genocide, and we still see it going on today. Mothers who kiss their kids goodbye in the morning and wonder if they'll ever see them again. Men who return home from a journey to find their homes ransacked, wives and daughters raped, grandmothers, grandfathers beaten to death and left on the side of the road. But if we don't take action, who will? And sometimes I'm asked, isn't it better to forgive? Isn't it time to forget a little so we continue with life, less affected by these events? My answer, it's not up to me to forgive. Ask the people who were murdered to forgive. Ask the parents who saw their children torn apart to forget. We can't afford to remain silent while other people suffer. We can't remain neutral, because remaining neutral helps the oppressor, not the victims. Silence encourages the tormentor, not the tormented. We must take sides. Human suffering should be a concern to all of us, and one person can make a difference. So I urge you not to forget, so we can learn and make sure this doesn't ever happen again, that we learn to take action, stand up for what's right, whether it's at home, in school, at work, because prejudice and hate has a way of snowballing, and we need to stop it in the beginning so that our children and our grandchildren don't suffer these consequences. So now I'd like to present my mother, and thank you for listening to our story.
When I hear my daughter talk like that.
That I know that's going to be continuity. And that's what worried me all the time. I'm 77 years old, and there are very few of us left. In my town, five really, we thought it was 5, but we found out it is 4 children that were left alive. 4 children out of 5,000. Right now, there are 2 of us. Myself and another person. She's 80. She doesn't speak so much anymore. The town had 15,000 Jews. After the war, there were 300. And now there isn't anybody. There's 1 family left. And my constant anxiety and worry was that after I had gone, those people who have been destroyed and killed and murdered for nothing except that they were Jewish, they had no other crime, just being Jewish, that they were destroyed and there'll be nobody to tell the story. And then I hear my wonderful daughter. And then maybe you'll hear from my grandchildren. There will be people who will be telling these stories. So all those people who have died will not just be in vain. Because every time I speak like this to all of you, I feel that I've come to a cemetery, but those people are not buried anywhere. They're ashes. In fact, most of my childhood was stepping on ashes. They have no graves. They have no names. You know, in Israel, there's Yad Vashem, where they have a children's pavilion, and they mention names. You walk in there, it's dark, and they have name after name after name, and they have pictures separately. They can't put them together. We don't know which pictures are to what name, as if an entire people was going to be destroyed. And this was exactly what was supposed to happen. I'm really here because of a miracle, and this is why I feel so obligated to talk about it. The first miracle is my birth. I was born in September, just a little thing like that, born in September, and I was a year old when the war broke out. So my parents left their hometown and went to visit their parents. Because when the war breaks out, one thing people want is to be together with each other. Families, friends, families, people who speak the same language, the same religion. When bombs are falling on your home, you want to be with somebody that you love and they love you. So my parents went for 2 reasons. First, the war almost broke out, and then to be with their parents and to celebrate my birthday. They never got back to their hometown where I was born because a bomb fell on our house and everything was destroyed. But we weren't there. Pure miracle, and it was just my time of birth, September. People ask you about my memories. How can a child like myself remember? How is it possible? Let me tell you why. My mother was a very unusual person. I have a picture of her. I never show it to anybody. My kids know that my daughter has her picture in her house. She was unusual. She thought that the way she can save me and my mind was to tell me the truth. She never, ever lied to me. She never said to me, no, this is okay, no, it will be safe. She never did. She said, you behave A, B, C, D, if not, you'll be killed. And let me show you what killing means. She once took me to a specific shooting because there were laws in one of the camps I was in. The laws were that if you see a German coming towards you, you have to give him right of way. You put your hand to the back like this, you lower your head, and no eye contact. Well, she practiced this with me. She practiced. She was afraid. She went to work in the morning. She didn't know when she'll come back. I was just by myself with all the other kids. But she practiced every morning. She was the German, and I was walking. And at one time, an adult person was face to face with a Gestapo. They announced, this is how we're going to behave if you don't follow our rules. They had a public shooting, and she took me. And she said, look, look, you see? So I learned. I learned to behave. I learned to be quiet. I learned not to ask for anything, not to ever say that I'm hungry. You know what's interesting? When I came to America, I was 12. We still didn't have much money, but there was food. I was afraid to ask for a second helping. I was so used to it that even in this country, I couldn't ask for a second helping in case there wasn't enough. So you learn to behave in a certain way. That's why I remember so much. And what did Hitler do? Look, we work for Jewish Family Service. I've been there for so many years. Jewish family, or any family. Family is the center of our lives. This is what makes community and it makes a nation. Well, Hitler was brilliant. The first thing he did, he destroyed the family. How did he do it? Which people are superfluous in a family? The elderly. Who needs the elderly? In fact, I never saw a person with white hair until I was 50. Till I came to America, because anybody over 50 was killed. So I watched my grandparents being shot. We lived in a ghetto, and there they were, all the elderly people. They were shot. My mother's parents were just shot. It was like an everyday occurrence. You were old, you had to die. My father's parents, I had a little bit more contact because my father came home and they never, by the way, not speak in front of me. They never always spoke in front of me. And my father said, I just took my parents and put them on a truck. You know, he says this to my mother, you know how we dug the grave. The children, adult children, dug the graves for their elderly parents. I had to put them on a truck. My mother was crying, he told this. My father was crying. I helped them up. We didn't say a word. We hugged, and it rolled away. So the elderly were gone. When somebody sometimes comes to me and says, why did you go, to death like sheep? My goodness, like sheep. Who wants to fight? If Jews never fought until Israel, we didn't even know what a gun was. We can't even slaughter our own meat. If you're kosher, you can't just go and shoot something and then eat it. You have to have a designated person. We knew nothing about slaughtering and killing and blood. We can't even eat blood. So when people come to me and say, why did you do that? I want to ask my father, why didn't you leave? You saw. And he said to me, we couldn't imagine that humanity can do this to each other. He said this to me, we couldn't imagine. We thought this will disappear. So here we are, no elderly, gone. All the grandparents. And who are the next people who are dispensable? Children. What do you do with children? You have to feed them, you have to clothe them. They're in the way. They can't work. They do nothing. So he started on the children. That's how he took over 5,000 little children under the age of 12, because when you were 12, you could go to work. And if you were lucky and you were 11, and you could look as if you're 12 and 13, and you can lie, because many kids, I'm sure maybe you heard the stories, would lie about their age. The parent would say, you're 15, you're 15. And the kid would say, you're 15. And if you happen to be able to pass, because either you were tall or you were physically developed, then you made it. But if you didn't, straight. So all the children were taken away. I don't know how how I somehow survived, because I remember after my grandparents, both grandparents were killed, they took us all out. At that time we lived in a ghetto. Well, we all lived in a ghetto. No Jew was allowed to live outside, unless he was pretending. Even then, look, you have to be 1/16th, I think, 1/16th of a drop of blood or something. I don't know what Hitler had his own recipe or what formula, who was Jewish, but you had to live in a place where you either had barbed wires or you had what I call the human fence, where the people stood out around you with guns. So first I lived in a place in a ghetto with people surrounding us. Other times I went to another place and there were barbed wires. At the end, of course, I went to a place with barbed wires that were electrified. It was like funneling you, you know? You went from one place and then they killed as many as they could, because logistically, I don't know if you realize how difficult it is to destroy people. It's very difficult. You have to plan it. You have to plan exactly. You know how well he planned things? He wouldn't even let you die if you wanted to. In Auschwitz, there were people who wanted to go and just touch the electrified fence. It was better than waiting for your death. But you couldn't. Would you believe what happened? If they saw you even going near the fence, you would have severe punishment. You would have to kneel on glass and hold rocks in your hand for 24 or whatever more hours, because you dared to commit suicide. You dared to be in control of your own life. The amount of food they gave you from the very beginning of the war, starting in the ghetto. I was in 3 places: ghetto, labor camp, and concentration camp, extermination camp. They planned how many people they wanted to die in this particular time, because they had no room to put them in those wagons. Logistically, it was hard to get the wagons. They would fill the wagons with 300 people. And I'll tell you about my own trip in one of those wagons. But before you got into this wagon, they had to leave the place clean. Why? Leave no witnesses. I am a witness. There are very few witnesses left. There are very few children who are my age who remember. I was 6½, and I was lucky that my mother spoke to me when she was with me. She wasn't with me all the time. I met somebody who was 4 at that time. And that person doesn't remember anything. She was 4. I saw her. I asked her, tell me more. I know we were in Auschwitz together. Tell me. I don't remember anything. So therefore, I was just at the age where I could remember. And I could be a witness. And I can live longer than the other people who are now in their 90s and who died already. So I am like one of the youngest people who can still tell the story. So, let's go back to the place where I was first. That's the ghetto. People were dying. Death was like everywhere. You could walk on the street. Starvation, because they needed so many people to die. Those who didn't die, we shot. I remember one day, they took us all out of the buildings. There were 6 buildings, 4 stories high. Each time there were less and less people there. I knew where we were going, but I didn't get the concept. I knew gassing. I knew death, but I couldn't understand, you know. In fact, very few people, even my father once said to my mother, you think they take normal people like us and they put us in a room and they gas us? It can't be. It can't be. He says, humanity, I remember the conversation. In fact, the first time I ever heard the word America was then. My father said to my mother, it can't be. There must be America. America is going to stop. We constantly waited for somebody from the outside. This can't be happening. We can't be like that. But we were. And people were dying. And when they took us all out and they put us by this church, remember church? I went to see that church years later. It was a small white church with a big steeple. So they used that place because there was lots of space around the church. They also used the hospital grounds. They took us every place that there were grounds, and they put us there, and they just started shooting because the trains were coming, and they didn't have enough space. So they shot. My mother had me constantly. She always covered me with her body. I remember that many times. I sat and she was like this, and the shooting went on and on and on, and then it stopped because they had their quota. Because look, they had to move people from place to place. One of the criteria was, if you stay too long, you make friends. You know, they understood it. They must have had the best psychologists on earth. They knew if you break up the family, people don't feel like fighting. If you just lost your child, you saw your own child being shot right in front of you. It was absolutely an everyday occurrence. Every hour, you saw them shot, or you see your parents. The people who are left alive, they were in their 30s and 40s. My father was about 32, 33. What do they care anymore? The fight is out of them. But they also knew that if you make relationship with somebody, friendships, you will also have some courage to survive. So they cut you apart. They would move you. In the middle of the night, they would come and take this room of people, or this barrack, or this building, and they ship you somewhere. And when it was all done very quietly. And when the other people woke up, they saw empty rooms, empty space. It brought fabulous fear into you. It worked wonders, the psychology of fear. And then each town was hermetically sealed. You know what that means? If you had family in the other town, there's no way for you to ever know what's going on there. Because people would write letters. People would tell each other. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. If you know that something happened in the other town, you expect it to be in your town. So you prepare yourself. But if no information, none, you couldn't get through from one town to the other. So each town was completely like this, hermetically sealed in every way. You had no idea if the family that lived maybe 100 and maybe 25 miles. 25 miles away. My family lived in Lodz. Lodz was a very big town. We lived in a town a half hour away. I took that trip. There was no knowledge. The entire Lodz family was taken into the ovens or into the they were gassed without us knowing anything till after the war. Can you picture that? Not knowing what happened to your sister, your brother that only lived 10, 20 miles away till after the war. That's how my mother waited and waited 3 years after the war, hoping that the idea was somehow sort of that everybody will come back to the hometown. My mother waited 3 years. Not one cousin came. Nobody came. Nothing. But she didn't know that. Because everything was, just imagine, it's like you're living in a nightmare. You can't wake up. You can't wake up. And the movie, I once met a woman who was in 50 different places. She was sitting there, it was a conference, and I think it was in Washington, D.C., child survivors. She was sitting with a cardboard thing that she wrote. This is what she wrote: "Do you know me? I don't know my name, and I don't know my age." What happened to her? She was 3. In the crowd, she let go of the mother's hand, and that was the last time. And she wandered for the rest of the war, from place to place, because she knew nothing. And to this day, that was about 10 years ago, she is looking. Can you believe that? She's looking now, and when I was reading it, and I had this thought, oh my God, what? That's terrible. She said, you know me, do you know me? I said, no, I don't know you. I'm just reading what you said. So what I'm saying is, this kind of tearing families, tearing friends, destroying the family, killing the elderly, destroying the children was going on from the very beginning until the very end. So, I'm lucky. I went to 3 places only, and I was with my parents. So here I am, this first town where I was in the ghetto. Everything is destroyed. And what's interesting is this is the interesting. People ask if I believe in God. I always say it depends on the day. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But I remember that my father, 23 people were left to clean up. There was always a group of cleaning up people because they wanted to look as if nothing is happening there. If the Red Cross ever came, which he did, by the way, because they set up a special town to show that nothing is going on, at least in this town there will see nothing happen. So I, my mother, my father, and 22 other adults went cleaning up, picking up the bodies, burying them, going into the room, putting the pillows back on the beds. Can you imagine? My mother said, do this, put this, pick up the chair, do that. We did it. But what's amazing to me, but I only got this as I was older, in this terrible time where it seems that God has abandoned us, my father said the Kaddish. Kaddish is a prayer for the dead in Judaism. That doesn't talk about death, it praises God. How can my father praise God? I remember he took the shovel, he had all his head like this, he was wearing the yarmulke, he covered his head, and he buried the dead. And to this day I'm wondering, how could he in this hell say a prayer where you praise God? But he did. He did. So, here are we in this camp. 23 people left, and the place is spotless. We were there for a few, I don't know. See, time is very bad for a child. And by the way, I never spoke to my mother about it. She died very young. My mother died when I was 18 in America, when she realized that I was safe. I was finishing high school, I was safe, I was pretty normal. She laid down on the couch and she died. She could not handle this. All her life, she told me about her brothers and her sisters and why I'll never know anybody, I have no grandparents, I'll never know the family life, I'll never know anything. And she said to me, I'm so glad you don't remember anything. You were too young. And I didn't say a word. This is protecting my mother. She suffered so terribly that I did not want to tell her, Mom, I remember a lot. It's better this way. We always protected it's hard to imagine human suffering even after the war, when you sit back and you realize what happened to you. While you're in the war, you're like trying to keep alive, just to make it the next day, next hour. But then when it's finished, you look back. She went into a coma also, she went into a shock. But she never knew how much I knew. So, somehow, I'm taking you back to the ghetto, and she said to my father, you're going to kill us now. We cleaned up everything, it's all clean. My father said, no, maybe not. He said, what are you going to do with us? We did everything. They took us to the next place, which was worse. That was called the labor camp. That's where my parents worked, in a factory outside of the camp. For ammunition. Now who was left? Some children were left, and able-bodied people. The elderly were gone. So, the kids were by themselves, running around like crazy, playing vicious games, I was always scared that someone was going to hit me as kids, you know. And the Germans were in their towers with their machine guns. Let me tell you something which is interesting, to me at least. All of a sudden, somebody gives us some flour and water. And they tell me, all the kids, they make a makeshift, like a stove outside. They put something in it, they put some tin, and on the bottom is newspaper, and this woman who's left, there's always one person who was left with us in this camp, while all the other people went to work. Either she was sick, or somebody was like one person. And she said, here's water and flour, and then do it very fast, do it fast. And she gave us each a fork, and she said, make holes in it. We did it. And she said, you gotta do it very fast. My thought, I'm 5. And I'm saying to myself, I'm gonna do this fast, I'm gonna be shocked. I'm gonna be shocked if I don't do it. I was watching them, and I did it very fast. And then she said, then it was on some kind of a wafer like that. She said, don't eat it. Your parents, give it to your parents. Now, I was starving, but I didn't eat it. That night, my parents came from work, must have been, it was very dark. I showed it to my mother, and she said, "Oi, it's Passover." These were Passover matzahs somehow. But I didn't know till I was an adult that you do this and you only need 18 minutes to make them. They shouldn't rise. They should be flat. Otherwise, I thought that I'll be killed. And I didn't know anything about rules of Passover. I didn't know what Passover was. I didn't know what being Jewish was. I've never been to a temple. I didn't know anything. I knew the word Jid, Jude, very common, and Jude or Jid had to die. What it was about, I didn't know. I didn't know anything. I didn't know what it meant religion, nothing. I just knew those 2 words, and I knew words. I still I don't speak Polish, although I lived it till I was 10 years old. I have an aversion to the language, so it just disappeared in my head. But I remember the word